Hello everyone, and welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. Today I'm very excited because I'm going to be talking about my favorite pulp from the golden age of science fiction. Now, I first got into science fiction kind of later than most of my other favorite genres of reading. When I grew up, I loved horror, and I had read some science fiction. I read, of course, the classic H.G. Wells novels, and I read Ray Bradbury, 1984, but I hadn't really taken a dive into science fiction. And then, probably about 10 years ago, I decided I wanted to read more science fiction. So what I did is I started picking up any science fiction pulp that I could find at estate sales and yard sales, and I would just read it. And I read quite a lot of stuff this way. And unfortunately, a chunk of it didn't age well and wasn't as entertaining as I had hoped it would be. But there was one that really stuck out, and that I still talk about today. And whenever I bring up Golden Age pulp to my brother or anybody else, this is the novel that I talk about the most. And it is The Man Who Awoke by Laurence Manning. This is actually the first edition copy. I think it's the only published copy. That's not true. I think there's one with a yellow cover. But this is the first time it was ever published in book form. And this was published by Ballantine in 1975. But the first publications of the story happened in Wonder Stories magazine. And it ran in 5 volumes through the year 1933. So this was probably written over 31, 32, and into 33. Or it might have all been done in 33, I don't know. But it was published in 33 in Wonder Stories. And it kind of feels like a fix-up novel because it's a collection of shorter stories with a frame novel. But it's not a fix-up novel like I, Robot or The Martian Chronicles, in that there's one character that is seen throughout the entirety of the stories. Each story, he's the main character in every one of the stories. So I don't know if he originally wrote it. I know that there is a difference between what was published in 1975 by Ballantine and what was published in Wonder Stories. But anyway, this is a novel about time travel. So one of the most exciting things to do when you read a novel about time travel is to kind of see how they did. I know people love to do this with really anything that's written in the future. 1984, all of these, we like to, when these years come around, see how everything kind of added up. Now, the time traveling that's been done in this group is thousands and thousands of years per time, but this book asks you to do kind of the same thing, and that's one of the things that I really liked about reading this book, is how much, or how fun it was to kind of consider how well he did at predicting what the future could look like. So, the frame story of this novel is that there is a man named Norman Winters who decides that he wants to travel into the future, and he does this by creating a room that doesn't allow any radiation from the sun or the environment into the room, and then he gives himself a concoction of drugs that allows him to sleep basically until radiation from the outside world touches his cells again. The science is hokum, but it should be noted that at the time that he wrote it, the concept that radiation hitting our cells is what creates aging was really being considered, and was being thrown around as an idea. I don't know if that's still the case, but at the time he was looking at what was very new science and turning it into fiction, which is exactly what science fiction is about. So he creates this room, and he goes to sleep, and he wakes up in 3,000 years the first time, pokes around just a teeny bit, then goes back to sleep for another 2 years, or another 2,000 years, in order to bring it to the year 5,000. I think that Manning did this so that every time he woke up, it would be a good round number of how far we were into the future. So the first major jump that he does takes him to 5,000 AD. And part one is called The Forest People. I think this was March of 1933 that this was released in Wonder Stories. So, The Forest People, of course, it introduced us to the frame story, but then it takes us 5,000 years in the future to a time when humanity is trying to save itself after what they call the Great Age of Waste occurred. The Great Age of Waste is a time where humanity was using resources, really wasting resources as fast as they could for luxury. And basically what's happened is there's been all using of resources has been brought to a halt, and the political lines have split between generations. So it's become about age instead of political leaning, although there is political leaning connected to it. All of the older people in this society feel like that they should continue to use these resources, and the younger people feel like they should cut down their use of the resources and save them for future generations and think about future generations. This is when I was reading this book and went, wow, he kind of spot on got it in this case, looking at the environmental movement. He was I think, as far as I can tell, one of the first people to bring up the concept of global warming, or kind of a lot of environmental ideas. I'm going to say he was the first for a lot, and the Wikipedia page says he may be the first for a lot, but it's really difficult to tell. If you guys know of any firsts that I mention here that actually came before this one in 1933, I would love to hear about them in the comments. But as far as I know, this is the earliest I've read about the concept of global warming and the destruction of the environment through the use of all the resources. I'm only going to give you kind of a really quick idea of what each section's about. There is plot that goes on in each of these sections that is very interesting and very enjoyable to read, but I don't want to give away this kind of the story plot for each of these sections, because you should read them. They're really fun. So he meets that aspect of humanity, goes back into his room, and goes to sleep for another 5,000 years, which brings us to part 2, which is called The Brain, and this happens in 10,000 AD. In this story, humanity is controlled by a supercomputer. And this supercomputer basically makes all choices for humanity. And it's stubborn. It won't change kind of the way that it thinks. But its number one goal is to make humanity's lives much better. And basically, when he wakes up from his slumber, the computer is starting to realize that perhaps humanity is superfluous in the relationship. That basically it does all the work and humanity reaps all the rewards. There's no real firsts in this. I believe people had talked about supercomputers taking over humanity. I think this is a sci-fi trope that goes back probably right around to the turn of the century. If you know the earliest, please let us know in the comments. So he deals with that aspect of humanity and then goes back into his room and goes back to sleep for 5,000 years, which brings us to part 3, the City of Sleep. This happens in 15,000 AD. this was kind of when my jaw really hit the floor. I was surprised that he was so kind of on the nose about environmentalism in the future, but this was, for me, the earliest that I have read a Matrix style trope in science fiction. Basically, he wakes up to a world where there is this massive factory. Well, no, it's not a factory. There's a massive machine that's like the size of a factory. And all of humanity are kind of surgically attached to this machine. Aisle after aisle of humans attached to this machine. And they're able to live their perfect dream lives connected to this machine. And that is, I mean, straight up, kind of the Matrix, right? The concept of living a virtual life through being attached to a machine. Now, a small group of heroes, they're called, have decided to stay awake and take care of the machine, basically service the machine, because if they don't, humanity will die off, because if the machine breaks down, all of humanity goes with it. So there's like 14 or 15 people that have decided to stay awake and watch the machines so that humanity can live like this throughout its entire rest of its existence. And there is some very interesting philosophical questions asked in this part of the text. Anyway, he deals with all that, goes back into his room, and goes back to sleep. This brings us to part 4, which is called the Individualists. And this is 25,000 years into the future. And this is interesting. Basically, humanity has embraced individuality to the extent that every human has their own small city that they live in alone. And these are mobile cities. They drive around the earth in these cities, but only one person lives in each city. They are alone to the extent of having a city that sees to their every need. And basically, anytime two individuals want to talk, they speak through war. The cities attack each other. And this is the only way for humans to communicate, is through these wars with these cities. Really abstract, really wild section about individuality taken to the farthest degree that it can be taken to. Very much a section worth a read. Anyway, he deals with that, goes back into his room, goes back to sleep for 5,000 years, and that brings us to part 5, which is the last section of the novel. This is called the Elixir. Basically, mankind has discovered scientifically the elixir of immortality. Everybody lives forever. Everybody's needs are completely seen to. And because of this, humanity has grown bored and kind of impatient and tired of existence. And the novel ends beautifully in basically mankind scattering out to the stars for adventure in order to bring purpose to their lives of immortality. So it ends with man breaking out into space and exploring, which is the best way a sci-fi novel can end. I want to speak about one specific part of this final section that I think for me was the best moment of the entire novel. So he shows up in this new future. Everybody's immortal. There's some people that are talking about some scientific problem. I Can't even remember what it was. I read this a while ago. But there's basically two factions form, and they're trying to discuss what they're going to do about this problem. And our main character, Norman Winters, feels like one side is obviously very right and the other side is obviously very wrong. So he secretly grabs a steel pipe that he finds sitting on the counter in this room that he's in with these people, these factions fighting. And he puts the pipe behind his back and he gets ready to basically knock somebody in the head with this pipe in order to make sure that the side that is right wins. But what ends up happening is all the people spot him with this pipe, and they are all instantly shocked and disgusted. And it turns into all of them speaking to him and saying, "Oh my gosh, we forgot that you have come from this archaic time where you would literally use violence instead of logic and understanding to win an argument." And in the end, Norman Winters looks almost like a caveman when compared to these Earth people that have had thousands and thousands more years of evolution and are able to handle problems with just logic and understanding and speaking to each other. And I think that for a time that had a lot of pulp that was about super strong rocket men going into space and the human way was always the right way, and just kind of the power of the main character, for Laurence Manning to, near the end of the book, show how archaic and barbaric his main character is, and how impossible it is for the culture so advanced that he's basically shown up for to understand him. It's incredible. I think Laurence Manning was really ahead of his time, and I think he saw a lot of what the future would be that I think we'll still see come to pass as time goes on. Really quick, a little bit about Laurence Manning. He was a Canadian. Lived in New York for a large chunk of his life. This is his only science fiction novel. I was able to find a few other short stories in the same magazine, Wonder Stories, that weren't connected to this book. I found two more, one from 1932 and one at the end of 33. But basically that's it. He didn't write a lot of science fiction. He kind of, I guess it was just a phase. He enjoyed it for a bit, gave it up, and after that he started writing books about gardening. And apparently his career was in something to do with plants. I'm sorry, I can't think of what it is right now. I just read it recently. But yeah, he was very much into gardening and plants, and he kind of went down that path instead of being a science fiction writer. I think if he would have kept writing science fiction, we might know his name better than we do. Anyway, I would give this book in rating an 8 out of 10. Absolutely fantastic. Really enjoyable read. I highly recommend it. It's probably the best. It is the best of the Forgotten Pulp that I have read. And when I say Forgotten Pulp, I mean stuff like this that's a one-off, that's a name that you never really hear come up in conversation. If you've read this, please let us know in the comments what you think of it. If you know of any firsts in science fiction that predate this of 1933, I would love to hear about it in the comments. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please click like. If you like this kind of content, please click subscribe, and we'll see you at the next video. Thank you so much.